Welcome this first day of July on this calendar. I wanted to expand upon many things in this video. My sort of conundrum has been, which channel am I going to upload it to? Well, I'm going to upload the same video to twice because to try and separate what I wish to say into different perspectives, one namely through art, and the other more general and more to do with the esoteric. It makes it more difficult to actually express. One moment, I need to see what's going on behind me. So I don't know how many of you heard the noise going on behind me. Let's just say that Junus is sort of watching over me, shall we say. There is no coincidences about anything in this reality. We need to look at the elephant in the room. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to refer you over to Niven channel, where he shows that the form and the structure of this reality is pretty much built on the backs of colossal sized elephants. That is the elephant in the room. I'm not sure how many of you are aware there is a place in London called Elephant and Castle. London, or the City of London, and all that goes on in association with that would be an example. I mention about this because through a video I made very recently, a little walking tour of Monchique, and as I was making that video, what came into my mind, one moment. I don't think that paused, I apologise. I had a tickle in the throat. Anyway, going back to the topic, as I was making the walking tour of Monchique, the thought that came into my mind was, I hope Niven watches this and is able to see things that, because I'm up close and in Monchique, I'm not going to be able to see it. You need to take a higher view, an aerial view in this particular case. And that's something else I wish to talk about. So we could go back to the story in Genesis of God moved across the face of the earth. It was without form. So let's just have a look. What is described as the head? The land masses are associated with different parts of the body. So we're looking at the head. So if you can see, sort of here is the western part of Europe. Here is the sort of eastern part of Europe, and down the middle here, running through Sweden, through Germany, through Austria and through Italy, is what was at one time were called the Central Powers. So if we now see this as a material political play out of an alchemical marriage, you've got two hemispheres of the brain, and you have, shall we say, this middle path. What can we see in this? Well, if we take Scandinavia, for example, the one country that stands out, although apparently recently it has changed and joined NATO, was the neutrality of Sweden. Consider what is based there, in particular Ericsson and communications, and as I understand it, Ericsson were responsible for the more sensitive documents of the US government, for example. And then you start looking into who owns Ericsson and so on. The plot thickens, shall we say. So if we move down through Europe, through into the more central part of Europe, because we need to get to the centre, the heart of the things, we come to the nation or the land area known as Germany and as Austria. They were called the Central Powers. They were locked between the West and the East. It's something Rudolf Steiner talks about in his lectures throughout the First World War, how the perspectives of the West and the East and the centre of Europe all vary slightly. So when we look at what has been played out historically, you'll see that there's been a push from the West, there's been a push from the East. There was a unification of the German states that was not fully realised. In some ways you could say it was realised in 1938, where Austria was incorporated into a Greater Germany, shall we say. But if we go back to the unification in 1871, think of it in terms of the alchemical marriage. What was blossoming in that central region? And I can think of no better example to give you than art itself. Think of the great names that have come out of that central region: Mozart, Beethoven, Schiller, Goethe, the painters Dürer, and, his name has Arnold Böcklin. Just a few examples. I would say you reach the pinnacle with the composer Richard Wagner, and what he shows, the sort of public being given an awareness of the cabal in the ring cycle, for example. But you have this unification, that central part of Europe, and I'm including the Austro-Hungarian Empire in this, or at least the Austrian part of it. You have this blossoming of what would have been an equivalent and possibly greater than what we would perceive as the Greek age today. But of course, that was destroyed. Now, why was it destroyed? What series of events was happening? Well, you only have to look at the alchemical marriage. You could say the Western and the Eastern hemispheres of the brain reflect as the Western and Eastern parts of Europe. So, to use Rudolf Steiner's perspective on this, the East had still retained something of their folk soul. Hence the Bolshevik Revolution, which was to destroy that. The West was going more what Rudolf Steiner would call the fifth post-Atlantean age of individualism. It is a path that humanity takes in its evolution, but it will lead to a sixth. So with that central region of Europe, you had that union, you had that blossoming expressed through art, which is a commentary of far more. It was breaking out of a global monetary control system. Although I do have my own thoughts, when you look at the fruit of the seeds, you can tell a man by the fruit of his seeds. So right at the top of Germany in the 1930s and 40s, if you follow the track record, he was actually masquerading to be doing something good, but was actually ultimately doing something terrible, which I feel gives the impression of an independence. So it can be any blossoming that was coming through. It was already in its death throes by about 1900. You could say Rudolf Steiner was the final flowering of that era. of what was coming out of the Germanic speaking world. Of course, it spills over as well. So we could take, if we look at the symphony, for example, and the development of the symphony in Europe, you had Franz Berwald representing Denmark, you had Grieg representing Norway, you had Sibelius representing Finland, but Sweden didn't have an equivalent of like a great composer until 1871 with Stenhammar. But then when you come down more into the center of Europe, you've got names like, you've got J.S. Bach, who is the most well known today, but during the era, it was Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach that set the trend with the symphony that inspired Haydn. I'm trying to think, there's another composer. I'd like to give more credit to the lesser known composers that are overshadowed by Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. A name, for example, is Carl Czerny, who was a pupil of Beethoven and then tutored Franz Liszt. But you can see this individuality of the Western Hemisphere reflected in... I'll have to give you an example here. There was a time on the radio you would hear something along the lines of this or that composer wrote 5 concertos. Their most well-known is this particular concerto, so that is the one we're going to hear tonight on a broadcast. But we moved into an age further and further of individuality, of natural curiosity, of the human spirit. And so we live in an age, thanks to the technology, that just through YouTube alone, you have a chance to explore the works of Carl Czerny, or at least some of them, and the other composers that were overshadowed by Beethoven, like Hummel, a contemporary of Beethoven. Carl Maria von Weber is another example. I'm talking very much in the musical sense because that also ties in, as much as everything else in this reality. Consider yourself and how you fit in to the grand scheme of things. You have this physical outplay, this alchemical marriage, expressed politically as a unification and then a division, and then a reunification. So in a way it is a foreshadowing on a material, physical outplay, which has sort of jumped the gun in a way, because we're now coming into the era in this 5th post-Atlantean period, to use Rudolf Steiner's explanations. We are moving into a 6th evolution, a 6th post-Atlantean age. This is where the rise of the Errants comes into it. I'm going to put a link to a specific Steiner lecture which comes from a series of 15 lectures in 1915. Notice 2 15s there. 15 lectures in 1915. There is no coincidence. 1 and 5 make 6. The 6th post-Atlantean era. If you think of the chakra system, what is number 6? It's referred to as the 3rd eye. Why is it the 3rd eye when it is the 6th chakra when you're counting from the root? Because you need to start at the root of everything. Because we're in a realm of perceived duality of an Eastern and a Western hemisphere. So what was coming out of this Germanic central part of Europe, I would say roughly is from about 1700 to 1900. So you could even take it back to George Frederick Handel and J.S. Bach, both passed in 1750. So I wish now to sort of expand on this year, 2024, which does tie in with the whole art theme. So I'm just going to read something to you written by Friedrich Schiller. It's called Ode to Joy. Joy, thou shining spark of God, daughter at Elysium, with fiery rapture, goddess, we approach thy shrine. Your magic reunites those whose stern custom has parted. All men will become brothers under your protective wing. That, in its German, the original German, is what Beethoven set to his Ninth Symphony. Now, if you listen to that Ninth Symphony written in D minor, that was written or completed and first performed exactly 200 years ago in the year 1824. It is also the birth year of the composer Anton Bruckner, who also wrote a Ninth Symphony in the same key of D minor. Now, this is where I say you need to ask yourself, where do you fit into all of this? Because Bruckner passed on the 11th of October, 1896. This physical being came along on either the 21st or the 22nd of May, 1966. So that is exactly 70 years, less either 143 or 144 days. Now, interestingly, in the Bruckner catalogue, the number assigned to the incompleted parts of Bruckner's Ninth Symphony finale was WAB 143. Like I say, 143 years is short of 70 years since Bruckner's passing and this physical being coming into this reality. And it was another 30 years, so you could say 100 years before this physical being and one of its previous walking souls discovered Anton Bruckner with the Ninth Symphony. You could say this is all coincidence. I say it is not, because I feel far more to this. It is exactly 200 years since the birth of Anton Bruckner. So you have 200 years since the writing of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in D minor. It is 200 years since the birth. 200 years since the anniversary of the birth of Anton Bruckner in 2024. And that Ninth Symphony has now been fully realized. It was first performed on the 30th of November in 2022. 30th of November in 1894, I believe it was when Bruckner completed the third movement of this Ninth Symphony. A little bit of history with this Ninth Symphony of Bruckner. It is largely thanks to one of the Schalk brothers, a student of Bruckner, who put the idea into the collective consciousness that there were only ever three movements and the fourth was just fragmentary pieces, not enough to put together and give you a fourth movement. The truth is completely different. This is confirmed by a testimony of Bruckner's own doctor, Dr. Richard Heller, who is the only living being to hear that Ninth Symphony finale played by Bruckner himself on the piano. But that would have obviously been in a reduction. I apologise for the coughing. But it's the late conductor Nicholas Harnoncourt who says that there is enough material there for it to go to print tomorrow, and he put out an appeal if anybody has those missing folios in a private collection to seek them out. But thanks to the work of Dr. John A. Phillips, along with 3 other composers from the period roughly about 1983 to 2012, the symphony and all its fragmentary pieces, all its short draft forms, were able to be put together to give you the cohesive whole. And I believe in Berlin this year there is a second performance of this realization in its as close as you're ever going to get to its finalized form. It is a realization, it is symbolic. This finale of this Ninth Symphony expresses, and this is from a personal perspective, from what I feel in the music, by listening to the music and hearing it internally, where do certain chords strike you? Where do you feel the physical or the emotional sensations contained in the pure sound, i.e. not with human voices, just the orchestral sound that comes through in this music? It is otherworldly. The theme at the start of this finale, well, it actually starts like a lot of Bruckner's music with a tremolo played very softly on the strings, so it creates a sort of vibration out of the nothingness. It's expressing life. Then this theme then comes through in this Ninth Symphony, this da 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 da, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. The rhythm of it is referred to as being the cross theme, because this is a representation of the resurrection, of lifting out of the physical body of the soul, returning back to source. Bruckner could have only have written that finale by having such serious health problems that this finale occupied roughly the last 9 years of his life. Within that time frame, his health had deteriorated to the point that he had the last rites read. He was a devout Roman Catholic. He was also an organist. So this also has to be taken into, to someone who's not heard the music of Bruckner before, it can sound disjointed, but it's from a perspective of someone whose instrument was the organ. You therefore have to change positions of stops with an organ, so there has to be a break, or as Bruckner put it, before I have something important to say, I have to take breath. What he is purveying by going through the experience of close to death enabled him to convey in pure sound what effectively the Michelangelo painting points to on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. You'll notice the hand of Adam is stretched out, the finger is stretched out. The hand of God, which is in the shape of a pineal gland, is reaching out, reaching down to the Adam, but the fingers do not quite touch. What that painting is showing you, that there is nothing between you and God. There is no thing between you and God. You are God, even if you don't realize it. You are a co-creator. The creator is not a singular form. It is everything, and yet it is nothing. I look for patterns in things, and I see patterns in things like this map of Europe, how it represents, with the history that has played out religiously and politically in particular, it is still imparting a message. I'm going to refer you to that Rudolf Steiner lecture called Christ Within. It talks about this moving from the 5th to the 6th post-Atlantean age, this spiritual evolution of humanity. It's very much like the Plato's cave analogy, where you're seeing one less dimension from the dimension you are in. So whilst we perceive three dimensions, if we take in consideration time, that is your fourth dimension, but it is not one we see in the moment. Likewise, the chakra system and the evolution is one behind. So the fifth moving to the sixth in the post-Atlantean sense is reflected as we move into out of a fourth to a fifth sense, as it were, because really touch and taste are one sense that it's the most recent evolution in the physical. Notice also, and in terms of the way Rudolf Steiner talks about it, the folk soul was most heavily invested in the rural peasant class. That was retaining something of the previous evolution of humanity before it got its individualism, the awareness of the individual I, which is actually quite recent. Consider how Plato, for example, in the Greek era would have expressed something, and this is paraphrasing Rudolf Steiner. He would not have said, I have this idea. He would have said, an idea has come through me. So this move from the fifth to the sixth Atlantean age is, as Rudolf Steiner basically has predicted, that we take this path of individuality, we follow that natural, innate feeling of wishing to come together as individuals, not based on blood, not based on the physicality, but based on the spirit. That is what a true errant is. It's one that goes their own way as an individual, but also realizing that there needs to be this coming together of the errants. That is very much the era that we are in. So you have 200-year celebrations, and it's not to pedestalize Beethoven, it is not to pedestalize Bruckner or any other of these great artists. I use the term great artists in the accepted sense that they are the most popular. But the greatness is in what they purvey. If we take the Beethoven Ninth, you'll get a you'll get a reminder of the first three movements in the opening of that fourth movement. And you hear this da 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 da, where the theme ends from the first movement before playing the second, and it's then repeated between the second and the third. It is a musical depiction of taking a quill and scrubbing out the idea. It's a recapitulation. It's like, no, we've tried going this way, we need to go back and start again. So this is what the first, second and third movement of Beethoven's Ninth is all about. It is very much of its age, which is described as the heroic age, which started about 1803. It's, in some ways, you could say, the pinnacle of art, the pinnacle of an expression of human evolution that is underway. And art is always a commentator. That is your real media that is showing you what is going on. Art, particularly in music, it cannot be framed, but it conveys in feeling. It speaks a different language from words. But because we were very much in this period of 1824, in this fruition and flowering of the individuality, it comes back with the real finale theme with the voices, and then where Beethoven quotes from Schiller with this joy, thou shining spark of God. the spark, the light, the activated pineal gland, in other words. It's an ode to joy. I don't feel I need to give you a definition of that. But the joy, the wonder, the self-realization. But of course, then it needs taking the next step in that evolution, stepping into this sixth post-Atlantean period, which is underway. It is happening right now. Whilst in the material sense you have telecommunications and everything from all perspectives, both negative and positive, that you can see with that, it does not incorporate the synchronized thoughts, the telepathic communication. So my walking tour of Monchique sparked something in Niven. If you read the description that is put, I'm humbled by that, but I recognize that, and I recognize it in others as well. As Jason of Archaic says, this world is not what you think it is. So again, I go back to this map and how the sort of outplay politically and religiously of Europe is showing an alchemical marriage, and also a destruction of that alchemical marriage. If you consider the Bolshevik Revolution, that the First World War was very much a part of setting up for, of divorcing that hemisphere and in destroying the vestiges of the folk soul, replacing it with a commonality, which was the polar opposite of the striving for individuality, and bringing everything down to the base level of the worker that now is separated because they've destroyed their own source of growing their own food and put into collective farms that just don't work. It's all part of a deliberate plan that is working on an anti-nature perspective. To use a Rudolf Steiner analogy, you could say that is the fulfillment of the Ahriman principle, whereas the Luciferic would be its opposite, the retarded, the holding back. So there's a conflict within that Luciferic and Ahrimanic impulses, but they are, in some ways, you could say, quite minor characters in the grand scheme of things. They play a necessary part in. This is also depicted in the 12 disciples. Think of the one disciple who played the role of selling out for 30 pieces of silver. That created a chain of events. That action had to happen. That same action is very much reflected in this era that we are in now. Well, I've chatted here for 33 minutes, and maybe it's meandered off in different ways, but I'm looking and trying to give you the common thread through all these things, looking at the patterns, where we can see the patterns, considering also how your individual self plays into that. Is it coincidence, this 143 or 144 days, considering there isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't see 144 or a 44 in numbers. I'm also seeing 46 rather a lot as well, because it's referencing the heart and the third eye. It is a reflection, it is a reminder to oneself. It is something that our spirit, our individualized, or our soul would probably be the better term, has set in place, and I'm going to put a link to a channel called Near Death Experience. I can't remember the full title, so I put the link in the description. There are countless testimonies. The penultimate, most recent one, not the most recent, the one before, I think it has a title of There is no God outside yourself, which is absolutely true. It's confirmed by what Neville Goddard talks about as well. We are just a fractalized perspective of something that is everything and yet is nothing. It is, you could call it source, you can call it oversoul, you can call it God. But it resides within each of you. But it needs to rise from the gut, the place of the sun, to pineal. That is when what would you could say is an external part comes into play here, though it is not obviously external, but it's the crown, that seventh part. So again, the seven, on a personal level, 70 years separates the passing of Bruckner to the arrival of this avatar into this reality. But you may have been confused by what I said earlier. I refer you to the playlist about walk-ins. I refer you to previous videos where I've talked about walk-ins. That's expressed in the Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. It's one is referring to the physical body, your relationship to your physical body. You could pretty much see between the operator of a character in a computer game and yourself. Think of what, we're going to use Mario as an example. What does Mario know of what is operating Mario? And what is the operator interacting with? Surely it is it not a computer? But consider, as I've said before, if it's an arcade and there are many computer games, always follow the source. They all share the same power source, i.e. the electricity. But inside you is the dielectric. Inside the magnet is the dielectric. Everything radiates out from you. Everything external of you is a reflection. If I knew anything of the life of Bruckner before hearing any of his music, he was a devout Roman Catholic. That would have probably put me off, and I probably would have dismissed it from the conscious mind of, through thinking of, no, that repels me. But because it is a polar opposite to how I feel, that is why there is this tie that I feel, particularly with Anton Bruckner, because it is Anton Bruckner's music that revealed things that could not be revealed in words, and still does. Right, this has gone on nearly 40 minutes now, so we're 38 minutes, so it's a 1:38, you could say. There is no coincidence to anything in this reality. That is an in the moment, another reference to that. So as always, I'm going to say unconditional love to you all.